This is a Geek Leader podcast, and I'm your host, John Rauda. This show is all about helping us grow as leaders, become better technologists, and improve our lives both at work and at home. I hope you enjoy the show and learn a lot. Hello, world, and welcome to a Geek Leader podcast. I'm your host, John Rauda. Today's sponsor is A2 Hosting. I've been using A2 Hosting solid state hosting solutions for our website at geekleader.com for many years now, and absolutely love their support, their service, and all the features that you get. You get access to cPanel. You get all of the things that you can imagine for a great WordPress experience, including their A2 optimized WordPress, which does extra security checks, extra lockdown. You can lock down your editor file so you can't edit anything inside there. You get alerts whenever there are file changes that are done. You can also do automatic updates, backups, and more with A2 Hosting. So highly recommend it. Go to geekleader.com/A2 to get more information and to sign up for their solid state turbocharged speed hosting today. Again, that's geekleader.com/A2. All right, Geek Leaders. Today on the show, I'm honored to have Luke Arrigoni on the show. And for the past 15 years, he has worked for, or he's founded it and kind of ran his own company, AirCorp, and working with artificial intelligence and machine learning. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So a little bit different than just straight up leadership, but we're going to be talking about tech, because most of us are all in tech anyway, and hearing all about some of the things that are going on with the machine learning and AI world right now. And if you're like me, you've probably heard a lot about it when it comes to cybersecurity and different algorithms and different ways to use like Google AI with your applications that you're developing, or AI from Amazon's perspective with AWS. But with all that being said, Luke, welcome to the show.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, if you don't mind, just tell the audience a little bit about your background and kind of how you got to where you are today, just to lay some context for the conversation.
Yeah, of course. So over the last 10, 15 years, I've been working in data science, kind of long before it was given that title. Back when it was like, hey, we have data. Can you find out something cool? Can we make more profit, reduce our costs, that kind of stuff? And I've worked for been fortunate enough to work for a pretty fun client list. We've done work for Stryker, UPS, Getty Images, Johnson & Johnson, kind of a real cool list of folks. And we've been around several industries. And yeah, we're a smaller team out of Seattle. We've been doing AI projects kind of to augment a lot of those companies.
Awesome. That sounds like a lot of fun work. So there's a misconception when you talk about AI. I know when I talk to some of my friends that aren't in tech, they just think of, Terminator.
Robots taking over the world, yeah.
yeah, and that kind of thing. And then when I talk to people in my field, and it depends on which team I'm talking to, right? So if I talk to like my cybersecurity experts, they're going to be talking about something that automatically detects a change in behavior and, either starts logging, interacts with shutting off a network port or something like that. And then if you look at my developer friends, it's going to be like something algorithmic they're going to be using AI for. Which areas do you focus on, and what do you think's kind of the trend that we're seeing?
Yeah, so just to touch on that with nomenclature, everyone says AI and it does mean something different to everyone. You're spot on. I think like the most traditional way to view AI is it's this big umbrella term. And if I were to make like 1,000 if-then statements, like how to fold a towel, and I just did a bunch of if-then statements on how to fold a towel, technically that is AI, but it's worthless AI, right? Like it's so hard-coded, it's expensive to make, it's brittle. No one cares about that. So I'm in the field that people are very interested in, which is, it's called machine learning, or even more specifically, we specialize in supervised machine learning. That's when you have a ton of examples of an outcome that you want or don't want, right? You want to detect, like you talked about cybersecurity, it'd be really anomaly detection. So you'd have a whole log of, positive access, and then you'd have, attempts or negative access, and that would be your supervised. And then you train the machine to do that one thing. Mm-hmm. So in many ways, it's actually dumb, far dumber than what people think of. It's not Terminator roaming the world. If Terminator was a thing today with our current tech stack, it would be like 1,000 AIs. And there would be like a lot of chips, and there'd be a big hard drive to host huge models for vision and audio. Every single task that the robot needed to do would be its own, quote, AI. More practically speaking, it would be a machine learning model. So, that's we're far off from that. And people are coming up with generalized AI, and that's not the field I'm in. Really, what I specialize in is when you have a ton of data and you have that outcome you're looking for, can you train a machine to adapt so when new data comes in, it learns? but really just get really good at solving that one specific problem.
Yeah, and when you talk about, like, I guess when I first heard about machine learning, it really came on the scene. People thought about chess, and then they got into like Go and how, I think it was Google AI was able to train an artificial intelligence to be one of the best players of Go. But it's come a long way since then. Is that correct?
It has, yeah, and that's actually a good example of the one specific task. That same AI that can play chess really well could not play checkers. And that's a good way of thinking about AI. Is we are training very specific machines.
Yeah. So when we hear somebody like Elon Musk tweet about we should be concerned about AI, we need some legislation about AI to kind of slow us down, and that invokes a lot of fear because a lot of people trust Elon Musk because he's
Right.
I mean, he sent a car to Mars. He's doing a bunch of stuff with rockets. Yeah.
And long before AI takes over the world, I'd love for him to make good on my car driving itself.
Yeah,
So,
that's going to be a while.
Not mean to bash on Elon at all. Just there's a lot of steps between us and robots taking over the world, including my car actually not running into the median, right? And that's kind of the funny part of it. When we hear him talk about, or others, not just specifically him, there are two camps. There's a camp that says that artificial intelligence will never reach some like higher level sentient like state, and then there's another camp that's like it's going to happen next year, right? And there's like fear mongering with that. I think reality is somewhere in between. Obviously, it's we're probably 10 years away from some form of generalized AI, which can do more than one task at the same time and does things that are eerily human-like. So maybe within this decade, but at the same time, I'm not sure how much legislation or any of that's going to really care. Well, that's really going to matter at all. And it's not something to be afraid of. It's something that we should just plan for.
Yeah. I think 10 years is pretty optimistic, honestly.
It can be. Absolutely.
Yeah. I like back on the time. So we have a Tesla as well. We got it, three plus years ago. And there was a promise of full self-driving, and within the next 3 years, it would be able to take you everywhere you needed to go, and you could, get drunk and get in the car, and it'll take you home.
That's it.
And I would say we're still 10 years away from that being perfected.
So that's, it's funny. I bought an X in 2019 with the exact same promise.
That's when we bought ours.
Yeah, exactly. So you and I are in the same camp. We kind of chuckle when we hear Elon talking about robots taking over the world, because I feel like there's like, well, can you first make your car drive itself, right?
Yeah.
But that's the reality. You're right that it might be longer than 10 years, but it's an entirely different team, entirely different effort. That's another thing to think about, which is generalized AI is not actually an evolution of what we're currently doing, but an entirely different work stream. So it's not like someone, like for instance, the cars we drive, they have about 26, I think it's the last time I heard it, somewhere around 30-ish AI models to run. And they're things like, is the thing in front of you a thing that will move? Yes or no? That's one model. Is the car in front of you going to change lanes? That's another model. There's all these different models that are composed together to make a car drive itself. This strategy is not a strategy for generalized AI. There's no path where you just eventually build enough and it thinks on its own. You need kind of a meta way of thinking about building models. And so while Elon might take, or someone might take 10 years to get a self-driving car, at the same time, there can be a work stream that kicks off today that in 10 years, if they're diligent and the hardware is there, they can come up with a more generalized model. So there's that's something just to kind of keep in mind.
Yeah. So going back to like, I've heard some podcast hosts argue about like what the difference between AI and machine learning. And how would you relate the two together for people that argue about it? Because you'll see articles that'll say AI is doing this, and then in the back of my head I'm saying, no, that's machine learning. Get it right.
Yeah, AI is the term that's used, like clickbait, right? It's something that everyone talks about. They want to think, how close are we to Terminator, and so they're going to click on it, right? But the reality is all the major advancements we've all seen are machine learning. So if you think about umbrella as the top term, and there being siblings underneath that umbrella, my if-then example is a sibling to machine learning. And then a child of machine learning is supervised and unsupervised, right? And so the majority of stuff you see today is supervised machine learning AI, kind of working up that ladder that way. So you can call it AI, but I mean, that's like the most broad generic way of describing something. And I feel like it's kind of duplicitous. It's not really the full truth. It's like, that's like me saying there's been a great invention. It's like, well, I guess you write code, it's invented, but like it's really supervised machine learning. But that's not as click friendly.
Yeah, it's definitely not, and it's to me in my mind, I've always thought they were very different things, and now I've seen it so much in the news and articles that I read, and every time I open up, Apple News on my iPad and scroll through, I see, AI in the subject line, and I've kind of just gotten numb to the whole experience, and it's just one and the same to me now, which I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
I have the same exact. I work in the industry. Whenever I see a headline that says AI, I'm doubtful to even click on it.
Yeah. So one of the things that I've seen a lot lately when it comes to AI is when you get into like biometrics and facial recognition and things like that, there's been some concern about privacy when it comes to that, and also some issues where AI may not be ready for some of this stuff when it comes to like racism and issues like that. Have you heard a lot about that? And what is your take on where we're going with using machine learning models for facial recognition, biometrics, and privacy concerns?
Absolutely. So yes, there's a field of my work now that's actually just specifically facial recognition. And I can't talk too much about the project. A lot of my clients, it's all very like this is their intellectual property, right? But I can tell you that things like racism is a delicate part of the AI process. There needs to be an honest conversation amongst the people that are building the system to, one, be able to say things that, it sounds weird to say things that are racist. That's not necessarily true, but say things that are basically an explicit conversation about racism. Like, I need to build a model for this ethnicity. Why? Because our generalized model of all ethnicities fail. It basically, if we make a generalized model, it is racist. So we have to build a racist structure around different, basically the variety of human faces, right? And this has all kinds of ethical challenges, right? Like, what does it mean? What is, like, we look at like haplogroups, like how do you really separate out who gets their own model, or what kind of model someone goes into? What's the prejudice that I bring to this process as an individual, right? And there are no right answers. Right now, I think we're all trying to figure out how to get there. And anyone that's listening to this, I know there's a lot of decision makers that listen to your podcast. If you're trying to figure out how to do it too, just know that there's uncertainty in the industry, and that research is probably your best friend, but also just being conscientious of your own bias is going to be, or the people that are working on it, making sure they're aware of it, is probably the best possible outcome. If you assume that you're going to grab some facial recognition software off the shelf and it's going to be perfect because someone else must have vetted it for racism, you are in for a world of hurt. You don't want that PR release where it says that all of whatever ethnicity all recognizes the same on your software. And that's the kind of pitfalls that people are trying to work through right now in a smart way, in a kind way.
So how many like items are you aware of where people are using facial recognition and machine learning, I'll say, for like crime and crime prevention and things like that? Because
Yes,
in my mind, whenever I hear about this, I always go to what's that movie with Tom Cruise where
Minority Report.
Yes, Minority Report.
Yeah. Yes. So there was a city that I did work for, which I can't name right now, but they basically had trolling video cameras on cop cars that were basically scanning people in the cities. And this was an enormous, like, I mean, it basically like was a constitutional violation, and they didn't know that it was even running. And so we basically had to have a conversation. Like, they're like, "What is this capable of?" And I was like, "Well, actually, you need to like turn this down. You need to turn it off. Like, this is like I forgot the exact constitutional thing, but it's something to the effect of it's an unreasonable search, right? To search everything."
Yeah.
And so anyways, that was kind of a fascinating process. But yeah, because especially it comes with the territory of how most cities, like municipalities, police departments acquire software. They typically acquire it from vendors, and vendors are trying to build upsell products, right? So you might get a product that scans license plates, and then in a year, that same exact product now scans faces, and you didn't have to do anything for it except check a box somewhere. And the people that are that private vendor aren't necessarily under the same moral, constitutional obligations that you are as a municipality. And so stuff like that can get snuck in rather easily. It's not a matter of your city deciding to pass some initiative to scan all your faces. It's their police department getting an upgrade. So it's something that everyone needs to keep in mind, I think.
So how much of that, like, are the citizens aware of that are going on? Like, am I going to see that in the news, or is it just going to
You'll
like sneak
definitely
up on
not
us?
see that in the news. No. I mean, if these cities are smart, they hire people, I don't want to say like me, but they hire AI experts, right? That'll come in and evaluate like what's our risk, what's our exposure,
Mm-hmm.
because almost all of those end unfavorably in a press way, in a legal way. There's litigious actions that can be taken because that is unconstitutional.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of times those are shut down pretty quickly, but they're out there all the time. And I can't speak for maybe a less funded municipality or less funded police department that may not be able to afford or may not know to call someone like me, right? And so for that, you're not going to see in the news. They're not going to understand it, right? Um, but yeah, I imagine it's out there.
Yeah, so I mean, things like that concern me because what if, there's somebody that looks similar to me, or close enough to me, and he's got a mask on because we're in COVID and people are wearing masks, and I've got my mask on. We're dressed similar, and the AI picks up on them breaking into a store or assaulting someone or something
Right.
like that, and then a camera picks me up, 2 blocks away, walking down the street, and I'm targeted as like an 85% match. Boom, I get arrested.
Oh yeah, it's fraught with all kinds of problems. So not that there's nothing that I'm aware of, where those biometric like facial recognition type stuff has been used in court. I am not a lawyer though, so I hope no one takes that as a legal precedent. Go search Westlaw if you're curious. But the reality is, I'm not sure how well that will stand up, and hopefully
Mhm.
that will get shut down by courts. I know I would be the first person to testify against the technology, and I'm an expert. I build facial recognition stuff. A lot of the facial recognition is actually built on cosine distance from major points on your face to another face.
Mhm.
And basically, it's saying if there's 1,000 numbers that make up the composition of your face, and there's, well, everyone has the same 1,000 numbers. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be more clear. I want to use like vector math for this, but I know that that's probably not going to be helpful for the call. So if there is 1,000 columns in a spreadsheet, and that's all that we all get for represent our face, each column will have a slightly different number for all of our faces. And the closer my face is to your face, the closer all of those column values will be. And so then we do basically a cosine distance across it, which is a special kind of math that says if you have lots and lots of numbers, how do I basically take the distance between them? And that is how we say this person is like that person. Is that in an ideal world, it's a zero difference, but that is almost never the case.
Mhm.
Like in two identical pictures would come up with at least some distance, unless it's the exact same photo. The probability of all 1,000 numbers being a zero difference is next to nil. So yeah, so you have that problem. You will never have an exact match, at least with their current technology. You have an approximation. Even for exact matches, there are approximations.
So it's really like AI probably should be used more or less to trigger things that, or to filter down all the information, all the cameras, whatever you will, to get it to where someone could look at it and make that last determination.
That was the outcome of that municipality.
Yeah.
That exactly what you just said was that, like, look, you can use this, but this is not an automatic system. This is maybe a tool you can use, but it still requires human intervention, and even humans need to abide by the Constitution. So you can't just scan everyone's face and look at that. But if there's an active crime that's detected by AI, and then you want to use biometric data for that crime, there's a lot more precedent that would support that work. But it's all human related. Humans are in that process.
Yeah, that makes sense. And to switch gears a little bit, I've been so in my industry, which is more in media, I've seen a lot of cool stuff lately come out with AI. Even so much so, I've seen one product where they took like an entire movie and had an AI watch the movie and create a trailer out of that movie. And it was actually
Yeah.
pretty good trailer. Have you seen advances in this kind of area to where AIs are doing kind of automatic editing of films or creating promos and things like that? And where do you see that going in the future?
So my heart is in entertainment. I actually started out in the world at CAA.
Ah,
Not sure if
cool.
you're familiar, like Creative Artist Agency,
Hmm.
and we were like trying to predict how much movies would make before they made them or before they did their. Back then, it was like trying to do like SVOD type negotiations and syndication negotiations, and basically it was all modeling, like how many points should the talent take on the back end or the front end, that kind of thing, and um, and I think now, so for the last decade, I've only thought about like how entertainment and AI play in. And I really do think that there's going to be a Netflix service in the next several years that is completely on-demand entertainment. I'm not sure if you've seen the site, thispersondoesnotexist.com.
Yes, I have, where AI generates a face.
It's a face that's never existed. That person has never ever lived. And yet it is indistinguishable from a well-done LinkedIn portrait.
Yeah, I actually
It,
saw an article the other day about people using that to to make their own LinkedIn portrait.
yeah, and that's what's incredible, right? Is that we actually are able to generate content that is it's beyond high fidelity, it's beyond uncanny valley. It is amazing. It looks humanoid, and I think there's going to be a combination of this technology, a GPT type technology, and GPT is this model that has been fantastic for generating text or scripts or trailers. And you take that, and then you take the actual visuals that get generated, and then even the music can be generated by AI. You can train a machine learning model to say, I want the composition of an action sequence soundtrack that's 35 seconds long, and it can learn from all the previous 35-second ones what the ultimate one would look like. And once again, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know how that would play into music law, but you can generate that as well. And there will be a time where you can go on this service like Netflix and say, I want to watch an action movie with a female lead set in space 1,000 years ago. And it will generate this bizarre situation. And it'll have the correct everything for this, or correct enough, or creative enough. And you'll be able to watch that series. And if you've ever hated if your series ended after 6 seasons, worry no more. The content will be able to just continually generate. And
That's
I think
insane.
that's a pretty bizarre world to live in, and that's probably coming.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely see that coming. I mean, they've been using CGI to, bring back actors from the dead in Star Wars, so I
Right.
imagine that
Yep.
they can do that, for series to continue indefinitely. Yeah, the thing that I saw, it was a couple of years ago at NAB, and they were showing where they took movies and played like this 2 hour movie through this and this AI kind of watched it and picked out all of the places where like the score got a little bit faster, or there was more action, there was more movement on the screen, and took those bits and clipped them out and created a trailer out of that. And for an action movie, it looked exactly like a trailer you would watch, that was coming out, which is quite impressive.
I think my prediction, wild prediction, is that the first time someone will do this will be redoing the Game of Thrones last season. They will
Oh,
use AI, and they will be a huge fanfic type thing. It'll be pretty fun. But I imagine that something like that, something where people were absolutely hating on the ending, Lost or whatever. There's a number of seasons or episodes that people can poke at, but I imagine something like that would gain a lot of traction. It'll be fascinating to see something that's like low budget. It's not going to be like Miramax next month coming out with a full-fledged CGI movie or a whole service coming out. It's going to be someone like a community effort to rebuild a season that everyone hates. And it'll have all kinds of legal implications that'll be fun to watch.
yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a pretty solid prediction. But it's interesting to think about. I've heard so much about, oh, well, rad techs are going to lose their jobs because machine learning can identify cancer so much better than a human can by looking at, x-rays or whatever, MRIs and such. But it may be that like lawyers and doctors, are the ones that are being replaced because, reading a contract and finding abnormalities, it seems like a pretty simple task for a machine learning algorithm. And like we're talking about right now, potentially creating movies and series from nothing.
Yeah, there really aren't too many AI proof industries.
Hmm.
It's probably mainly going to be things around creative. I know it's kind of joking. We just joked about like Netflix, and that's creative. But the reality is, there's like a whole second tier to entertainment, which is like truly creative, like independent type films that are way a deviation from blockbusters. And I think blockbusters will be able to be created day in, day out through AI. But there will be some movies that will move us, some entertainment, some form of art. I think that's going to be very hard for machines to replace, because there's usually those are people creating without training data. As a human, they're a machine that is developing something that does not exist before and cannot be recopied. I think that's kind of industries that'll be hard. So people in medicine that are on the forefront, where there is no quote training data for their own human brain, that can't be replaced. Those will
Yeah.
always be struggles for AI developers.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I can see how that will be one of those things where it's almost like intuition needs to be there, or something that's untrainable to
Yes,
solve.
there's definitely that. There's something that I'm sure. So I'm speaking. If someone hears this in 100 years and laughs at me, just know that like we don't have AI to develop for intuition right now, right? We don't have AI for that. We have. Do you have sets of data? But yeah, I mean that's really what you're hitting on is there's some intuition that some people have that some industries are dependent on even, and those are going to be very difficult to replace. Right now, we think about AI as augmenting, though. So back to your rad tech example, really, a radiation expert right now maybe be able to go through the scans of, we'll say X number of people during a day, and the hope is that AI can make it, X plus 50% of that. So like 1.5X. That's really the whole goal. And so it doesn't remove jobs from anyone, but it makes everyone either have their job be easier or make them do more work, or both. You can do more work and it be easier. Like, hey, this is the suggestion of what came out of this scan. And then a radiation expert would look at it and say, okay, yeah, I agree with that. You can do that much faster.
Yeah, I mean, it's so. What jobs are? I mean, you're right. You're talking about augmentation, but that means less people, right?
Yeah,
Eh,
that's absolutely the case.
And if we get to the point where there's less jobs available because we've developed so many of these specific task specific machine learning models and artificial intelligence software that's running to do one specific task, and they become kind of mainstream and cheap, what are we going to do? Do we need to look at universal basic income, or what's the future, and what jobs are maybe safe and which ones aren't that you're seeing?
So I think anything in art and math is safe
Yeah.
for a century. Like you are good to go. If you are an expert in anything that has to do with something being very creative or intuition based, as we mentioned, like sales, it's going to be real hard to replace sales, right? That's a very difficult thing for a machine to do well.
What are you talking about? I
Or
get those robocalls all the time about my auto
and I
insurance.
bet you buy everything they sell you.
Yeah,
That's right.
exactly.
Yeah. And then the second thing is math based, because math is like the foundation of the universe. And so you being
Mm.
able to speak in math is going to what be part of the revolution to bring these machines to be. But those are, I think, the safe for a century type stuff. There's, I think, a middle ground which we've talked about around intuition based items, and I think there's a bigger conversation. You brought up UBI. I think there are two worlds, and I don't get to pick it, but if I had to, I would pick one. Um, there's a world where we go towards a UBI, everyone works less, right? And there's some kind of recalibration of our economic system. It cannot be capitalism. Otherwise, you basically have a couple of percent that eat the rest, right? And that actually isn't stable. What you see in across the last 2,000 years is when there is that great discrepancy in income, there's usually like violent instability, right? Just being very practical. And that's not like great in my mind. I think there's a second option, which is as humans, we redefine what it means to work. We still work every day, but it's not on, remedial tasks, right? Like there was someone that, for a long time, like the person that made shoes in every single village, right? And now it's made in mass manufacturing, right? So like the idea around it, while there's still humans that work those factories, it's not like the job has changed entirely. I think the same thing is going to happen to us, where our whole perspective around what it means to do this unit of work will be different. And I think there'll be a lot more creativity demanded from us, which means curriculum changes, educational changes, right? Where we're teaching our kids the whole like think out of the box. maybe
Yeah.
that isn't like a one lesson or like kind of a hokey idea we all tell our kids, but like maybe that's the whole curriculum. Maybe our kids go for 12 years to think about how to think about problems creatively, right? Like that sounds alien, right? But maybe that's what it ends up being, right? Is 12 years of you need to think of something that a machine can't, right?
Hmm.
And then that may be it. But I like that future of we adjust our whole mode to how we think about work. We're still working, we're still doing things, and there can be an exchange of resources, right? We may or may not need UBI, but really it's not a saying, well, I just know how to make the switch, I'm just not going to work anymore, but that kind of reevaluation of what my work is.
Yeah, I think that's a good way of thinking about it. Um, and it's when you talk about creative fields, also think about like educators and teachers. Um, how sometimes you can't the same model of this is the best way to reach student A is not always the best way to reach student B. And I think those are also going to be a safe field that we need to, focus on and pay attention to, because sometimes it takes a teacher who's had a student like that, and can understand that, okay, this student's struggling with this way. I can see their body language. I can see their facial expressions while I'm talking that they're not getting this, and I need to explain it a different way. Whereas I don't know if we're ready for machine learning to do that.
I agree entirely.
So what are the things that you see that are exciting on the forefront coming forward when it comes to machine learning and artificial intelligence, that, the kind of things that you geek out over when you're talking to your friends over a beer or something?
um, so neural nets were like a huge, big bump, and they're great and they're huge. They're absolutely the workforce. I'm sorry, the workhorse for us. But there's kind of an offshoot of that, which is embedding spaces that I'm pretty excited about. I know I'm not trying to get too much in the weeds here, but if you are a decision maker and you're starting to hear your tech team tell you about embedding spaces, you should get excited. It's basically this idea of when we talked about faces, right? Like those columns. It's like this, but in a systemized way to understand how close things are to each other. This proximity type machine learning, I think, is going to help us overcome the old school binary stuff. So where before you had AI that was like, this is the decision, this is what came out. There was no real gray area. You had like these weird confidence scores you tried to trust to try and develop gray areas, or an entire machine learning system to predict the gray area of the other machine learning system, like very granular type outcomes. Embedding spaces are different. It's more of how we think as humans. And I'll give you an example. If the most common place for embedding space to use their language. And I've used this example a number of times. And if anyone's ever heard it, forgive me for repeating myself. But basically, imagine an aquarium. You fill this aquarium with like a clear jelly. And you have a whole bunch of words all printed out on little cuts of paper. And you took the word student, you put it inside the jelly somewhere, and you took the word teacher and you put it close to that word. And then you had homework. And you're like, well, this is more of a student thing than a teacher thing. So you put it closer to the student, but still close enough to the teacher, right? And inside of the space between all of them is this idea of school or learning. There's no word there, but yet that exists. And you can cut this aquarium into 3 separate coordinates, right? Like height, width, depth, that kind of stuff. And that would be a 3-vector space, or a spreadsheet with 3 columns on it. We talked about face having 1,000 columns. Our brains can't imagine a 1,000-dimensional aquarium, but a computer can. And this is a really exciting idea that's been around for a few years, but right now it's gaining a lot of traction. It's something that will help us be able to say, well, what's the gray space between? What's the real distance? How confident am I? What's the density of this area here? Are there a lot of words in this area? There are not very many words in this area. We can start to ask these models questions that we would ask ourselves. And I know I just did get into the weeds, and I apologize, but
No, that's fine.
But yeah, like it's something that I think you should have an eye open for.
Yeah. So when it comes to language, and we've seen a lot with the ability for deepfakes coming out, where they're able to replicate speech, voices, and patterns. Even, do you say that you can combine this maybe with some of that technology to come up with whole new stories that have never been told before?
Absolutely.
Even in someone's words. So like I could have, just an example, I could have Barack Obama give a speech that's never been given before.
Yeah, 100%. You can use his the lexicon that he would normally use. So you have this idea around the language that would most likely be part of it, but then you can shift the whole, like lift that language and then drop it into a different part of the embedding space to say, but instead talk about computers. Obama doesn't really talk about computers a lot, right? But you can lift those vectors of how he would talk and put it into the vocabulary of a different thing or a different topic. We call it a semantic space. And yeah, you can have him talk about whatever. And so, yeah, deepfake's definitely going to be a problem. I don't think there's a clear solution to it just yet. I know this next election, it's going to be something we see, not ironically. There will definitely be a crazy politician that claims that it was a deepfake when in fact it was not. Guaranteed it comes up. It'll be quite funny.
Yeah. So how do we defend against that? Like, what are the checks and balances to say, like, you know, cause I'm thinking right now there's a war between Ukraine and Putin right now, and there's been some deep fakes already that I've seen out there, but they've been pretty terrible. But what happens when they get one that's really good and it has like Biden saying something about Putin that's like completely offensive that gets out there that could potentially lead to a war? How do we have tools in
So
place that can automatically say this is not real?
there's two approaches to this in my mind. There's probably others, but the first approach is one that a lot of startups are taking, which is they build another neural net that tries to predict that neural net is bad, right, or is good, or whatever. This is a true one or it's a fake. But I think that's going to be a cat and mouse game forever, because if you have a neural net that trains it, you can train another neural net against it. And so, like cybersecurity, you'll just always be at war. I think there's another solution that's far more concrete, which is all these cameras that are taking these pictures and videos. They're actually like little computers. And if they were to print a certain hash of the video out to blockchain, like a small signature of what this frame looks like consistently, you would actually have a pretty immutable record. Like, this person at this time said this thing. And I think that there's some variant of that, not to get all into buzzwords with blockchain, but I think this is actually a pretty good application of it, where the camera itself can emit to blockchain and say, at this moment, I took this picture, it is real. And that would be much harder for a deep fake to do. I mean, you would literally have to create a deep fake at the event on a camera and then somehow not have that be compromised. And then everyone else's camera, right, like would have to do the same. Like, there's all kinds of ways that consensus can help this problem, but that would be one of them.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So blockchain and when you get into that, you're talking about. They talk about it's immutable, but yet there are actually services out there that can edit blockchain. I've seen some things when it comes to like cryptocurrency, and I don't know how all that works. That's kind of over my pay grade for sure. But are you going to get into services where, like, if things are all on the blockchain, you can use that to kind of roll back to see what really happened, what transaction here or there? Are they going to be?
Yes.
Is that going to be immutable, or
it is
immutable?
Going to be, so what you've probably heard about is smaller blockchains where you can overcome consensus. So let's say that, like, you and I can start a blockchain right now. Go to Amazon, there's like a service for it, right, where we create our own on AWS. We do this, and there's like a few different nodes, and we share it with our friends, and someone says, forget you, Luke. I'm going to bring 10 nodes onto your 20 node stack, or 11 nodes onto your 20 node stack. And, now I have a huge portion of the consensus. And so now this doesn't require as much, right? I could maybe get 6 or 7 confirmations on a fake event. Or, let's say I overwhelm the system. I'll bring 100 nodes on with AWS. And then there's no chance that you'd win on consensus, right? So you don't even need the majority, but you need a lot, or you could get the majority with compute power these days and overwhelm it. But if you think about like Bitcoin's blockchain or Ethereum, those networks are so large it would require a state level attack, and that state level attack would be incredibly obvious. It wouldn't be hidden. It would be a certain area of the world or many places of the world, but the IP address is bringing on millions of nodes. It would cost hundreds of millions or billions of dollars in compute power. It would be enormous. The effort would, and so like you couldn't even sneak it. So like they would know that you've modified that file, right? It would be like, okay, well, that file may be fake or not fake, but it can't be trusted anymore.
Yeah, I get what you're saying now. So as long as it's a big enough blockchain to where you can't bring enough nodes online to take it to take consensus, then it wouldn't matter.
Correct. So yeah, if you trust a bigger one, you'd be fine.
Wow, this all seems like it's all moving so fast these days. Do you see a point where like software development will become more of a machine learning model and AI than just writing code? You'd just be using models to come up with what the best way of solving problems in software is.
So I've actually seen GPT-3 has a product that will write code for you, so you could describe what you want, and it'll actually write the code for it. And then I've seen a lot of really great developers just demolish the code that comes out of it. And so, like, you have working code, but is it great? I don't think so. And that's the state of things now. Will that improve? Most likely, especially if you can have someone annotate code, or the code you go through all of like these GitHub repos. You said this code acts as a database. However you want to describe it, right? But it would require a monumental effort. It's not impossible, but we're not there right now.
Yeah. So you talked about embedded spaces as kind of being kind of the thing that you're geeking out over right now. What do you see as the next thing that's going to really hit the commercial market and kind of be one of those services that all of us leaders in tech need to pay attention to?
Language tech is amazing. We've spent a kind of a renaissance period in visuals, like being able to like identify objects and things like that. But now being able to identify sentiment and more subtle emotions inside of text, or real intent inside of text. Like, this is a passive aggressive request that you respond about this project. Like, imagine having like a 4-paragraph email from a client distilled down to that, right? I mean, it's funny. Hopefully it's not too sassy of an AI to be like, this is passive aggressive, but you can like actually like rate aggression in every email to see like where is it sitting on that spectrum. So if
theoretically, you could pipe all your customer service emails through an AI and then determine like what the priority should be based off of the angeriness of the customer.
Bingo. You do all kinds of stuff like that. And anything to do with language, around sentiment, around intent, around kind of planning conversations. So imagine like if you were like, basically I think tech is going to allow us to like turn on like ultimate sociopath mode. Be like, this is the best possible conversation to have with this client, this customer, whomever. And I think that's tech that should not be ignored. That's commercially ready now.
Wow. Yeah, it seems so cool. Like there's so much upside of all the things that are happening right now, and so many avenues for growth and future potential. Like just me being in the media industry, you hear about using AI for closed captioning, using it for QC, like we talked about earlier, creating trailers, but you can also use it for translations and things like that as well, which are getting pretty close. I mean, you could theoretically use AI to dub languages over movies or shows automatically.
Yeah, it's such an impressive time. I feel so fortunate. I wish I was born like 1,000 years from now, but but at the same time, like I'm pretty grateful that we're in such an exciting moment for this tech. It's something that's going to change our species.
Yeah, absolutely.
One trailer at a time, of course.
Yeah. One episode at a time.
Before it's transformational for our species, but it is. Like in the end, that's where this tech goes.
Yeah, it's almost like it has the potential to either really bring us together on a global scale, or potentially do some harm too if we misappropriate it.
Right, like every product on Earth, from the Chia Pet to nuclear weapons, has some massive impact, right? Like a 1 through 10 scale. Right, and this is somewhere like in the 9 in terms of like if nuclear weapon is 10 and the Chia Pet is 1 in terms of the ability to move our species. This is like a 9. This is about as close as it gets to a tech that really can have an enormous impact, and not a good or a bad, just something yet to be determined change on us.
Yep, absolutely. Well, Luke, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I think it's been super entertaining and enlightening of what's to come, and I'm sure our listeners have too. How can they connect with you and find out more about some of the things that you're working on?
Yeah, well, the best way to reach out to me is just on LinkedIn. You just go to, you search me, Luke Arrigoni, one of the top results there. Google, you go to our site, aricor.com. That's ARRICOR.com. You could reach out to us. Typically we serve enterprise clients that are trying to augment their data science programs. We have a cool team that is ready to look at whatever problems you have.
Awesome. And I'll link all that up in the show notes at geekleader.com as well, so you guys can go to it there. And Luke, thanks again for coming on the show. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
If you enjoyed that episode, please leave a rating and review in Apple Podcasts. I'd greatly appreciate that. And also, don't forget to check out merch. We have some T-shirts that I've designed that are on at geekleader.com. You can click on the merchandise section there and check that out. And also, don't forget about the books from our guests. So if you like this guest and other guests that have written books, please go ahead and check that out at geekleader.com. I would greatly appreciate it, and I'm sure they would too.